Christ formed in you for the sake of others. Welcome to the Wild Way Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to your very first Excursus episode for The Wild Way's Slow Journey Through John. Now, you may or may not know, but an Excursus episode means basically a rabbit trail, stuff we didn't really get to discuss in detail in the daily podcast or on the Explorer episodes. So our first Excursus episode is going to deal with the woman caught in adultery, or John 7:53 to 8:11. And as Nick taught us in episode 137, if you were to open your Bible right now to this, you'd see a strange note that says something like, "The earliest manuscripts do not contain this passage." Scholars agree that this event actually probably did happen, but it wasn't originally recorded by John, but somebody decided to include it in John's Gospel after the fact. However, it's still considered so universally valuable that it is in our Bible translations today. So let's listen to this passage and notice what catches your attention. And Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he returned to the temple. All the people gathered around him, and he sat down and taught them. The legal experts and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Placing her in the center of the group, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone women like this. What do you say?" They said this to test him, because they wanted a reason to bring an accusation against him. Jesus bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. They continued to question him, so he stood up and replied, "Whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone." Bending down again, he wrote on the ground. Those who heard from him went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. Finally, only Jesus and the women were left in the middle of the crowd. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Is there no one to condemn you?" She said, "No one, sir." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, don't sin anymore." What especially struck you from this passage, or what did you notice that maybe you didn't notice before? Let's get right into the text here. So Jesus is teaching the people, and we can see there's a crowd around him that are interested in what he has to say. And suddenly there's a commotion. The religious leaders push through the crowd, hauling with them this poor woman who's been caught in adultery, and they are ready to kill her. Now, as you may have learned in episode 137, under Jewish law, to be caught in adultery meant the death sentence. But in order for the charge of adultery to stick, two witnesses had to actually see the sexual act take place with their own eyes. Once this happened, the parties involved could be killed by stoning. So here's what we know about this woman. She was having an extramarital affair. So either she was married, or her sexual partner was married, or they were both married. Secondly, she was observed in the act, which means the two witnesses, or the two men, watched her take part in this intimate act, and that is disturbing all by itself. Number 3, she alone was hauled before the religious leaders, and there is no sign of the man with whom she was involved. And number 4, she was likely feeling violated, ashamed, aware that she'd just blown up her whole life because now everybody would know what she'd been involved with, and also she knew she was facing death. Although this is always called the story of the woman caught in adultery, two theologians, Amy Smith Carman and Annalene Rabbi-Boshoff, both believe that the focus should actually be on the sinful, powerful men who abuse powerless women. So what we know about the men who hauled this woman before Jesus. Number 1, they were voyeurs of her sexual act, and they recorded the details to share with the religious leaders. Number 2, they physically forced her to appear in front of the religious leaders. Number 3, they publicly outed her sin in front of her community, and everybody now knows of her shame, including all the families that have been affected, such as children or spouses. And number 4, they were ready to commit murder, which was a grievous sin and they were ready to twist the law to make that happen. So, for instance, when the leaders present this woman to Jesus, they say, "In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" John David Punch writes, "Adultery is not a sin you can commit by yourself, and the Torah demands that both parties guilty of it are to be stoned. Yet only the woman is brought to trial. The man's absence should be a clear sign that there is no real intention to uphold the law." And so while this story is famously the story of the woman in adultery, it's clear that the sin of her accusers is grievous, but they cannot see the log in their own eye, so to speak. So you see, the religious leaders were trying to trap Jesus using this woman. And it's possible that they orchestrated this entire event, including setting her up with this man, just to catch Jesus saying the wrong thing. As William Barclay tells us, if Jesus says that the woman should be stoned to death, first, Jesus would lose his reputation for love and mercy. Second, he'd get in trouble with the Roman law, for no Jew had the power to pass or carry the death sentence. And third, if he said that she should be pardoned, he'd be teaching people to break Moses' law and even condone and encourage people to commit adultery. So it's a very tricky situation that Jesus is faced with. And how does Jesus respond? As we've seen previously, anytime there is a situation with the religious leaders, Jesus usually doesn't back down, and he usually just engages verbally with them. But here he takes a very weird approach. So imagine this really tense scene. You are sitting around Jesus. It's a beautiful morning, and you are learning from Jesus and enjoying his teaching. Suddenly, these religious leaders are forcefully and physically drag a woman freshly caught in adultery, throw her in the middle of the crowd at the feet of Jesus, publicly shame her, and are ready to kill her. What would you be feeling at that moment? The situation would feel tense and dangerous, and I would want to save the woman, but I would feel quite helpless to do anything against the powerful religious leaders and their laws. And other people might jump up and try to argue with the religious leaders, and still others might meet violence with violence and attack the religious leaders in order to save her life. But shockingly, Jesus does none of those, and he does something that probably none of us would think to do. He simply stoops down and starts writing in the dirt. And to me, that would seem like a ridiculous solution. But it's brilliant. Because here, we see Jesus is walking his own talk. In a situation that could easily call for violence, Jesus takes a non-violent approach, and he acts in everybody's best interests. He intervenes in a way that saves everybody. So the woman will be saved from death, and the leaders will be saved from committing murder. Whereas this day could destroy so many people, including the religious leaders who would have the guilt of death on their hands, Jesus intervenes not only to save the life of this woman, but the souls of the wicked leaders, effectively modeling for us what it means to love our neighbors and enemies. When we are confronted with hatred towards ourselves or others, the easy approach would be to respond in kind. For many of us, or maybe just me, if somebody is being aggressive and angry with you, your first instinct is to match their aggression and anger with your own. The Christ-like approach would be to act in love. And so in this case, Jesus diffuses a tense, nearly violent situation and protects all involved from irreparable harm. Can we, too, love our accusers and enemies in a way so that we will not contribute to anything that causes them harm, from the words we speak about them to their face or behind their back, or the actions we take towards them? Much has been speculated about what Jesus wrote in the dirt. What do you think he was doing down there in the dirt? Was he doodling? Was he writing? Some say that Jesus wrote a list of the religious leaders' names, or even a catalog of their sins. Others say he was writing down his response. He was composing his response to them in the sand. And still others say that he simply stooped down and just started doodling, like drawing a couple trees or something, as just a startling way to disrupt the chain of events. However, this could symbolize something even greater. Can you think of a time in the Old Testament when someone wrote with their finger? If you remember, in Exodus, it was God himself who wrote the 10 Commandments on stone with his very finger. And as Peter David Punch says here, John presents Jesus not simply as a recipient of the law. He shows him to be the author of it. The significance is not what he wrote with his finger, but that he writes with his finger, just as God wrote with his. These religious leaders bring this woman before Jesus to trap him in the law, but they don't realize they're standing before the very one who wrote the law. And so there he is doodling on the ground. And of course, as what usually happens when aggressive people don't get the answer that they want, they continue to batter him to get him to respond. And Jesus stands up and simply says, "Whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone," and then goes back down and keeps writing in the dirt. In Matthew, Jesus is recorded as saying two things that correspond with this. First, he says, when it comes to adultery, the act of adultery is a sin, but equally great is lusting over someone who is not your spouse. Second, he says, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? So in saying, whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone, Jesus is turning the focus to the log in their eye, the sin that has darkened their hearts to the point where they can entertain murder, lustfully watch a woman in a sexual act, or even just entrap a woman to trip up Jesus. The religious leaders are acting hypocritically, wanting to shame and condemn the woman for her sin, but they want to keep their sin hidden and justified. So whatever Jesus was doing, it works because the religious leaders get the message, and the tension and their intent to murder just dissipates and goes away. And pretty soon, Jesus is left with the woman. But interestingly, they're still in the middle of a crowd who are still watching. "Woman, where are they?" he says to her. "Is there no one left to condemn you?" "No, sir," she replies. "I don't condemn you either. You're free to go, and from now on, don't sin anymore." And a few things to note here, and just a reminder that our working definition here at the Wild Way, we take it from Lisa Sharon Harper's definition of sin, and that is something that breaks relationship, or something that keeps yourself or others from living a flourishing life. Jesus directly names what she was involved in as sin. So we know she was definitely involved in something that broke relationship or kept herself or others from living a flourishing life. Jesus clearly and calmly calls it what it is: sin, without judgment, without anger, without trying to shame her, just says it like it is. And sometimes we get involved with things that we know are not the best for us or are damaging others, or even just in the way we talk to people, sometimes even in our own homes. As Jesus reminds us in Matthew, this could be something as small as where our thoughts go about other people, to as big as an extramarital affair. While we may want to justify or downplay our thoughts or actions or attitudes, at some point we need to just stop and face the fact that what we're involved in is sin, and it is not leading us or others to a flourishing life. And just a side note here, one ugly thing I've noticed, you've probably noticed as well, about the human condition is that when we discover somebody's moral failing, people love to gleefully shame and condemn that person, and they really enjoy the salacious, scandalous gossip. Think about when a person's sin is exposed, whether that is a celebrity or a coworker or somebody in your community. How do people around you respond? How do you? Do you feel a thrill, or do you notice others or feel some kind of weird thrill and glee, and they share the news with somebody else? Do you focus heavily on people's failures and then fail to look at the log in your own eye? I think we all do that at some point because it's a weird thing about humans. This woman's sin has been blatantly exposed, and she's currently surrounded by her whole community, or people in her community that now know what she has done. And I'm willing to bet there were people in the crowd that were whispering, and they were just like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta get home. I gotta go tell everybody. What are people gonna say when they find out what she's done?" But while everybody around her might have been acting this way, when she looks into the eyes of Jesus, she sees love, not condemnation. I don't condemn you either, he says. Now just imagine, in the midst of your own greatest sin and greatest moral failure, and it's been exposed to all the people that you know and love and work with and live amongst in community, and people are making social media posts about it, or people are like just gleefully sharing the news and just like it's some kind of excitement. And then imagine Jesus entering right into the middle of the fray, looking you in the eyes and lovingly and calmly saying, I don't condemn you. There is power and healing in that phrase. Others around you may condemn you and accuse you for your failure, but Jesus, the Word made flesh, the Lamb of God, the bread of life, the living water, the light of the world, does not condemn you. If we follow this Jesus, we ought to refuse the human temptation to gleefully gossip, shame, and condemn those around us whose sin is uncovered as well. As Jesus remembered this woman's dignity as a child of God, so too must we in the midst of people's greatest failures and shame. And in doing so, he offers the woman two paths. One path walks away from her sin and offers her hope. Sometimes we may feel that we have destroyed our life due to our sin or poor choices. I certainly have been in that situation before, where I thought that because of my choices and the sins and failures that I was involved in, that I had ruined my life. But it's simply not true. There is hope. Jesus is constantly calling us to turn from that which does not allow ourselves or others to flourish and to follow him. Your worst mistake, it's not the end. There's still plenty of good ahead, but you will need to extricate yourself from whatever it is that is stealing your flourishing. If I had known that I'd be sitting here in front of a microphone recording a message like this to you when I was 19 in the middle of lots of stuff I shouldn't have been doing, I would have been floored. I thought my life was over and there was no way God could ever bring me out into a spacious place and a good future. But here I am, and He has redeemed all sorts of things for me, and He will do the same for you. And the second path for the woman leads right back to the life that she was in, continuing to engage in behaviors that are destructive to herself and others, and will continue to bring hardship and suffering. If she was in some kind of romantic relationship with this man and it wasn't just a setup, she'd have difficulty extricating herself from that, especially if there were emotions and sex involved. But the more that she continued with this, the more she would cause pain to her family and to their spouses and their children and even their community and to herself. Now, we don't know which one she chose, and I'm sure that either way would bring its own difficulties, because the path of walking away from sin and extricating yourself from that which is bringing you down, it's hard, but it leads to life. And just as the pain of walking the other path of no changes, that would also be difficult as well. Either way, the pathway will be hard for her. But you'll notice here, Jesus lets her choose. He doesn't force her to go one way or the other. He opens up the paths and holds them both before her, and she gets to pick which way she wants to go. Same with us. We get to walk our own paths with little intervention from Jesus, which is on the one hand freeing and the other hand terrifying. Wouldn't it be a lot easier if Jesus would just supernaturally intervene to stop us from doing things that would cause ourselves or others harm? Fortunately, unfortunately, we get to choose, and it is these choices that create our lives. And next in John, we'll see that Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Part of following Jesus is a daily dying to self and choosing a lifestyle that embraces the lifestyles and teachings of Jesus that will keep you walking in the light. And so that means letting go of that which will lead you into darkness. Here's a few takeaways from this story of the woman caught in adultery. Number 1, focus on the log in your own eye instead of the speck in somebody else's. In other words, don't give much time or thought to judging others for their failures and poor choices. You worry about what's keeping you in darkness instead. Number 2, in this story, Jesus not only loved the sinful woman, but also the angry, murderous leaders. Is there an enemy in your life that Jesus might be calling you to switch tactics with and try putting into practice things like praying for them and loving them and trying to extend kindness to them. And number 3, Jesus, the living water, the Word made flesh, the light of the world, does not condemn you. So you should stop condemning yourself for your own failures as well. All right, I hope you enjoyed my very first solo episode. And if you have any thoughts or ideas that came up for you when you were listening to this, I'd love to hear. Shoot us an email at podcast@thewildway.ca. And I really appreciate you listening. Thanks. Bye.
A Slow Journey Through John is made possible by our donors who generously support the creation of Wild's spiritual formation content and the creation of Wild Way parishes. If you would like to help financially support the Wild Way with a tax-deductible donation, please visit thewildway.ca and click Support Us.